Yep. All right, now. Good.
I'm Vietnamese. I traveled to Germany to work. I earned 10 euros. I sent back to my family in Vietnam 5 euros. So maybe 4 euros. So in Vietnam account balance, we will have 4 as secondary income.
Right.
Credit.
Yes.
Okay. And what about the other 6? What happens if I still stay in Germany?
Then it is not. This is a purely internal German transaction. Because once you are a German resident, it doesn't depend on your passport. It depends on, and this is important because I will probably use sloppy language and I say the Germans do this or the Germans do that. Or the Vietnamese do this or the Vietnamese, but it's not about the passport or what citizen you are. I mean, we have a lot of people living in Germany who have German residence, but they are not Germans. So it's really about, I mean, if that person earns those 6 euros and then it's a German company paying a salary to a German resident that has nothing to do with the balance of payments. And only the 4 euros that are sent to Vietnam is an international transaction. And in fact, it is a credit in the Vietnamese secondary income and it's a debit in the German because the transfer goes from Germany to Vietnam.
If I come back to Vietnam and use the rest of the 6 euros,
then it is then you have, suppose you deposit this in a bank account. And then you go to Vietnam and you liquidate the bank account, then it's a financial account transaction about which we're going to talk, right? It's a funny thing, I haven't thought this to the end, but something has to cross a border, right, for things to matter for the balance of payments. To be frank, when I was a student, I wasn't interested in this at all. Because I found accounting super boring. And my professors taught it in a way that was super boring. So I settled on, I don't have to know this. Then I did my PhD. Then the first thing is I realized I have to do some empirical work. And I realized I have to understand the data. And the first big mistake I made, which had no consequences because I realized soon enough, I confused the capital account with the financial account. I'll come back to this later. And then I started teaching in Gürtensee. And I started teaching central bankers. Now I'm teaching people who are actually responsible for the balance of payments of their respective countries. Now, if you are not competent on this, they will notice within 20 minutes. And you don't want to do that, right? So I became something like, now I went deeper and deeper into this stuff. And I realized it's super interesting. It's really super interesting because it is the very data that we use for our empirical work. And if you don't understand the data, then empirical work is completely futile. The nice thing is the central bankers I'm teaching appreciate that. And the nice thing is also Bundesbank people appreciate that. So I had recently the Bundesbank published a book on 100 years of balance of payments accounting in Germany. And they asked me to give some kind of overview, big picture kind of contribution. I was quite pleased. And they said, look, Mr. Harms, you are one of the few persons who really take it seriously. Because there's so many other economics professors who don't really know what we're doing here. And so, yeah, that's something I try to give an answer to every of these questions. Sometimes it's quick, sometimes I have to think about it. Good. So let's look at data. Now this is the year 2023 for 4 countries, which I You have to sort out something. Okay, the pin. Good. Okay, here you have 4 countries. Which I mean, why did I pick those 4 countries? Well, I picked those 4 countries, to be frank, because roughly a month ago, I was teaching in Gürtensee, central bankers courses, and we had people from different countries, including Norway, Chile, and Uganda, and Switzerland was the country where I was teaching, so I picked those 4 countries. But now let's look at those countries in turn. Now these are credits minus debits for these different parts of the current account relative to GDP, right? We divide them by GDP and multiply this by 100, so it's a percent of GDP. So let's go through that. Let's look at Switzerland. Now, when it comes to goods, did Switzerland export more goods than import? Did the value of Swiss exports of goods exceed the value of imports, or was it the other way around? Yeah. Value of exports was bigger than the value of imports. I say the value because of course, everything is expressed in monetary units, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. I mean, Switzerland exports machines, Switzerland exports a lot of pharmaceuticals, chemical industry. You can only add this up by, so the value of services exports was bigger than, value of goods exports was bigger than the value. What about services? So Switzerland, interestingly, in 2023, that's the year that we're talking about, imported more goods services than it exported. What about primary income? Primary income was negative. The balance of primary income was negative for Switzerland. So Switzerland paid more on labor services and capital services again, this is a surprising thing, to be frank. It is driven by the fact that a lot of people from France, from Germany, from Italy, which is in the south of Switzerland, go to Switzerland every morning, earn a salary, and so this pulls down Swiss primary income. Now, to be frank, some 10 years ago, if someone had told me this story, I would have said, no, that's not relevant. But checking the data, this is actually driving the show, right? So Swiss primary income is negative because, Switzerland has huge assets abroad. They also have liabilities vis-a-vis the rest of the world, but the assets are much bigger than the liabilities. And still, they earn very little on their assets. So primary income on capital is low. And they make these payments on labor, and so the primary income is negative. Secondary income is negative. So does that mean that Switzerland gives more transfers or receives more transfers from the rest of the world? They give more. Does it make sense? Yeah, Switzerland is a rich country. Now, right, I mean, it would be weird. I mean, in Germany, something like 13 to 15% of people living in Germany have a migrant background. In Switzerland, it's 25%. Switzerland is a country that is, in terms of population, highly globalized. So it's not surprising that a lot of people are sending home money, kind of the personal transfers thing, and Switzerland is also giving development aid. So more. Now, when you add the blue, the red, the green, and the yellow, you get the purple, right? So it's as simple as that. You have net exports of goods, net exports of services, primary income, or balance of primary income, balance of secondary income, and you can visually actually check it. Good. What about Norway? Did Norway export more goods, or was the value of exports bigger or smaller? Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any idea what Norway exports? No. They did that until the 60s. Then they discovered oil. Norway is very rich in natural gas and oil. Norway is one of these countries that, Norway used to be a poor country until the 1960s. It's a very rich country now. Now, oil and gas have their problems. We know that, but but in terms of, and Norway is handling it very wisely, as opposed to a lot of other countries who don't. So this is basically, this may be seafood and salmon and whatever, but it's also, it's most of first and foremost. So services imports being bigger than services exports. So they import more than they export, right? Now primary income, you see Norway gets more primary income from abroad than it receives more. And what about the yellow thing? They give more transfers than they receive, right? So if you add the blue, the red, the green, and the yellow, you get the purple current account balance. You see that the current account balance of Switzerland in 2023 was something like 5.5% of GDP. Norway had a huge current account surplus. 17% of GDP is, by international standards, very large. Now Chile. What about Chile? You know where Chile is? In South America. It's this super long, I mean, I think it's, Vietnam is very, I mean, the south of Vietnam is very far away from the north of Vietnam. But I think Chile is even more, right? Chile is super slim and goes all the way on the west coast of Latin America. So again, Chile, what about the relationship between exports and imports in Chile? They exported more than they imported in terms of goods. Now, when you look at services, yeah, they imported more than they exported. What primary income? Then they pay more. And now, please note, in absolute value, the primary income balance is super large. Right? So you have, so it's, now, if you forget about the green thing and you just take the blue and the red, the current account balance would be positive. Yeah. Why? It's not positive because Chile has this hugely negative, well, huge is maybe exaggerated, but it's about 5% of GDP. So this negative primary income. So they pay more than they get. In the case of Chile, it's basically profits of subsidiaries of foreign multinational corporations, right? So a lot of, I mean, you have an American company having a subsidiary in Chile. This is negative primary income from a Chilean perspective. So again, you add the blue, the red, the green, and the yellow, and you get the current account balance, which in Chile was minus 3.5% of GDP. Now the last thing, Uganda. Do you know where Uganda is? In Africa, right? Africa has kind of those countries like Egypt, Morocco, and so in the very north. Then they have these Sahara countries like Mali, Niger, and so. And then you have these green countries in the heart of Africa, and Uganda is one of them. Well, Uganda has, what about Uganda? Uganda import more services. What about primary income? It's negative, they pay more than they receive. What about secondary income? Exactly. And this is not small change, right? We're talking about 4% of GDP. So you see that this pulls up the Ugandan current account balance. My bottom line is, don't ever neglect primary income and secondary income. Many people do, right? But in some countries, it is really a very important component of the current account. So you see that the current account balance of Uganda would be much more negative, or the current account balance, without that secondary income that pulls it up. Okay. Good. Now let's talk about the financial account. The financial account is the second big apartment in that building called the current account. The financial account in Germany is called Kapitalbilanz, which is also kind of a problem because the financial account reports transactions that involve the acquisition and sale of financial assets and liabilities. Now, what is an asset? An asset is any of the forms in which wealth can be held. It can be ownership of a firm. It can be ownership of a building. It can be ownership of a equity, right? Stock, some company's stock. Can be a bond. Can be straightforward credit. So someone owes you money. That would be an asset. So everything that entitles you to get some payment at some later date is an asset. And a liability is someone else's claim against you, right? So you owe money. You're running a factory that is owned by someone else. You are a company that is partly held by foreign stock owners. These are liabilities. And all countries in the world have, or some countries maybe I'm exaggerating, but most countries have assets and liabilities. The question is how much and what is the composition? Now, in the financial account, a net increase of assets is reported and the net increase of liabilities is reported. Please note, it's not the stock of assets, it's the change. We come to the stock later on. So if you own $1,000 worth of American equity at the beginning of the year, and you buy another 500, so that you own 1,500 at the end of the year, the net increase of assets is 500. It's the difference. If you borrow money from abroad, say I borrow from you, probably, yeah, if I borrow from you 500 euros, then Germany would incur a liability. So the stock of liabilities of Germany would increase. By the end of the day, we will also always look at a net figure. So the net increase of assets minus the net increase of liabilities. Note that both the net increase of assets and the net increase of liabilities can be positive or negative, which is interesting, right? So for example, if you hold a American stock and you sell it, then your assets decrease. And if this is the only thing that you do, then the net increase of assets is negative. So that's the logic. So, okay. Now, when we look at the financial account, and that's very important later on, we have to distinguish between different types of assets that matter. And the Balance of Payments Manual distinguishes it between the things that I enumerate. First thing is so-called foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment arises when an entity has equity that gives it voting power of 10% or more in the enterprise. What is the intention? The intention is if you own a large share of a firm, then you actively influence the management of that firm. Put differently, if I own one share of Microsoft and I travel to the United States and say, I want to talk to the management of Microsoft because I think they're doing a bad job, I will probably be sent away by the person at the gate. He would perhaps offer me a coffee and say, nice to see you, but look, you're just a small-scale owner of our company. You're too unimportant. Now, suppose I show up and say, I'm an owner of Microsoft. I want to talk to the management because I think they're doing a bad job. And the people say, the person at the gate says, how much do you own? And I say, 15%. Then I'd probably be asked in because I'm very important. So in the first case, I would be a portfolio investor. In the second case, I would be a direct investor. Usually, it's not individual persons being direct investors, it's company. So there is a Czech car factory called Škoda. You may have heard about it, maybe not. Škoda. It's 100% owned by Volkswagen. So Volkswagen has, in the early 90s, bought Škoda in the context of Czech privatization program, and Škoda is now 100% owned. So that's typical direct investment. And so if companies increase their direct investment or reduce their direct investment abroad, that goes into this part of the financial account. Portfolio investment is involving debt or equity securities other than those included in direct investment or reserve assets. So if I buy American equity, if I buy American bonds, if I buy Vietnamese equity, if I buy Vietnamese bonds, all this goes into portfolio investment. That's a big, that's kind of the small trades on financial markets. Other investment means you're lending or borrowing money from a bank. So when a German bank lends money to a customer in France, it is increase of assets in the other investment category. When the German resident borrows money from a Swiss bank, it's an increase of liabilities in the other investment category. Then there's financial derivatives as employee stock options, which are also crossing borders. I will not talk too much about this because it's a small entry. The last big entry in the financial account is the change of central bank reserve assets. Now, central banks, say the State Bank of Vietnam, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, they buy and sell foreign currency assets. Why do they do that? Well, they do that to influence the exchange rate. Now, we want to know which transactions on financial markets are done by central banks, and that's why we have this separate category. Now, if this entry is positive, then this means that the domestic central bank increases its assets vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And if the entry is negative, then reserves go down. Good. And the balance of the financial account is you take the net increase of all assets and subtract the net increase of all liabilities. Now let's look at, Now, here are some examples. So if a German investor buys Romanian government bonds, then that would be a portfolio investment, an increase of assets, because German investor has a claim against Romania. If a German company sells part of its business to a British multinational, then this would be in the foreign direct investment and would increase of liabilities. If a German company sells shares to a US resident, but not just a small-scale investor, that would be portfolio investment, increase of liabilities, because the stock owned by the foreign investor in a German company is, from a German perspective, a liability. If a German company borrows from a Swiss bank, that would be other investment, increase of liabilities. And if the Bundesbank sells part of its reserves, then this would go into the reserve assets, decrease of assets. Okay, so let's look at those four countries. So this is the financial account of Switzerland, Norway, Chile, and Uganda in 2023 relative to GDP, right? Otherwise, these numbers would be very hard to compare. So we start with Switzerland. So did Swiss residents do more FDI abroad than foreigners did FDI in Switzerland, or was it the other way around in 2023? So did FDI assets increase by more than FDI liabilities in 2023? Can you say it? Try. What, the assets or the liabilities? The assets, exactly. So the assets increased by more than the liabilities. So there was foreign money coming into Switzerland, Swiss liabilities increasing, there was Swiss money buying foreign assets, and the difference was positive, so there was assets were increasing by more than liabilities. Portfolio invest, yep.
It's positive, but it means like we are paying more to earn. We invest more in other countries.
Yes. Good. Yep.
More money out, but it is positive in this sense because we have more stuff.
Exactly. Assets, well, we have to distinguish between the stock of assets, which we will talk about later, and the change of these assets, right? This means that in the year 2023, the increase of assets was bigger than the increase of liabilities. It doesn't tell you whether, when we look at the stocks of those, whether Switzerland had more assets or more liabilities. It's just about the change, right? So in macro, actually in all economics, there's flow magnitudes and stock magnitudes. Let me give you an example. You have a bank account, right? You have the money that you have on your bank account at the beginning of the month. This is a stock variable. It's like the capital stock, right? It's something that you observe at a given point in time. And then you have the transactions on your bank account in a month. These are flow magnitudes, right? Ins and outs. And then you have the stock on your bank account at the beginning of the next month. It's like capital and consumption in macro models, right? Capital is something that you measure at a given point in time. Consumption is something that you measure in a different period. I could now elaborate on that for half an hour, but I don't think it makes a lot of sense. But this is about the change, right? You see that direct investment assets increased by more than direct investment liabilities for Switzerland in 2023. Also, same thing for portfolio investments, right? So Swiss residents bought. The increase of portfolio type assets was more than the right? So there were people buying the stock of Swiss firms, but there were also Swiss people buying the stock of foreign firms, and apparently the second component was bigger. Now, other investment is bank credit. So did Swiss banks hand out more credit to foreign customers, or did Swiss customers take more credit from foreign banks? No. It's positive. So it means other investment assets increase by more. So if a bank lends money, then it's an asset for the bank. So the Swiss bank, so other investment went up. What about reserve assets? Did reserve assets go up or down of the Swiss National Bank? Went down. So the Swiss National Bank sold a lot of its foreign exchange reserves. And so since these foreign exchange reserves are assets, the assets went down. Now, this does not mean that the stock of reserves of the Swiss National Bank is negative. In fact, it's hugely positive, but it decreased. I mean, don't know whether I still have that presentation. Look, this is what we're talking about. Reserves going down, right? Reserves still being positive, but the negative entry is just reflecting what's happening here, right? Why did the Swiss National Bank do that after years of increasing its stock of foreign